Robert Saleh essentially said Zach Wilson is the starter for the rest of the season. That can't possibly be true, right?
Yeah, and I don't know how deep you want to get into this with potential quarterback options for the Jets, but basically every name that was a non-zero chance of happening was thrown out last night.
Right.
Like we had so many different options, and it just doesn't feel like that can be the case. You've got to at least put a lot of work into looking into if you look into a lot of these other options, and trading for some of these guys might be too much. You don't want to give up the draft capital or whatever it is, or you figure, I don't know their exact salary cap off the top of my head. Maybe we'll have to get Brad Spielberg on the line here, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But I don't know exactly what their cap situation is, but I got to think that they're pretty close to the floor, given the fact that they were trying to contend for a Super Bowl this year. So I don't know what the options are money-wise with some of these other better options that might be out there that might even be available for a trade. So my point is, though, is that you have to look into everything. Whether it's a free agent who's not on a team right now, whether it's a guy like Matt Ryan who's in a broadcast booth, whether it's Philip Rivers who's probably out in a ranch somewhere, like you got to look into all of these options, because unfortunately, even though I don't seem to be as negative as Peyton Manning was, they're not going to get to where they want to go with Wilson this year. Like, it's just not going to happen. And if you want any chance of having that again, or something close to what it would have been with Rodgers, you got to look elsewhere, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get onto it in a little bit, but they shouldn't have won that game. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
This should have been a loss, and there's no way the set of circumstances that resulted in them winning this game is going to repeat, throughout the season. Like, if that is the level your offense is going to be without Aaron Rodgers, you're going to need a better solution to that. Now, look, there's always mitigating circumstances, right? Like, Zach Wilson won't have taken any first-team reps during the week. He came in cold, all those kinds of things. He'll have a better preparation for the next game in that they know he's starting. They can give him some work and get him ready. But I feel like we've seen enough of Zach Wilson to know that that's probably not a great option for them going forward. And there's almost certainly better options out there, whether it is trading for somebody like Jameis Winston. Carson Wentz's career has gone off the rails, but Carson Wentz is sitting around waiting for a phone call. Like, there are options out there, and it feels like a team that was expecting to be a Super Bowl contender has to do something at quarterback and can't really roll with Zach Wilson. What would your solution be? What's your top 3 wish list?
There's a lot of different ways that you could attack this, right? I mean, you could go, all right, most realistic option, best option, funniest option, okay, if money doesn't matter, kind of. And there's so many different ways that you can approach what the Jets might do here. I think.
All right, well, hang on. With that said, give me your most likely option, your best option, and the funniest option. Give me one for each.
It feels like most likely option is either Carson Wentz or Joe Flacco, because they're not on teams right now.
Right.
You could call them up, you get them in the building immediately, and it just kind of comes down to me, okay, does Joe Douglas want to spin the wheels again with Joe Flacco, or does he want to try something else? And I feel like, unfortunately, that those are probably the most realistic. Maybe you throw Matt Ryan in there as well. I don't really know the Philip Rivers thing. I think that Philip Rivers is retired. I don't know. I don't really think that's super realistic, but I feel as though one of those veteran guys is probably the most realistic. The best option for them, I think, is Jameis Winston. I really do, because you've at least got to roll the dice. Certainly, I think truly best case scenario, money doesn't matter, Matt Stafford, right? It would have helped, I think, if the Rams wouldn't have looked so good this past weekend, because I don't know if they're going to want to move on from him. But if you get a couple of weeks into the season here and the Rams start losing some games and they realize, hey, we are full turn of the page. I know Stafford's contract is huge, but if money doesn't matter and they can figure it out, that's the best option, no question about it, of guys that could actually elevate this team to get to a level. But I don't know how realistic it is. Jameis Winston, to me, is much more realistic because the contract's not very much. It probably wouldn't cost you that much in draft capital to go get him. And this is somebody who has obviously won games in this league before. Now, there's a reason why he's a backup, of course, but no option at this point of the season to address what the Jets need to address is going to be perfect. And I think that you would probably take the swing of the bat with Jameis Winston, because there's a handful of other guys like, Jacoby Brissett, I think, is something that comes to mind. Gardner Minshew is another guy that comes to mind. Nick Foles is somebody else that comes to mind. But at that point, what are you really doing? Do you think those quarterbacks can actually get you where you want to go? I'm not saying Jameis Winston gives you the easiest or straightest path to where you want to go, but at least he has the arm to say, hey, we can make the most out of this passing offense when we need to hit our deep shots. If he really has turned down the turnovers since his Buccaneer days, we've got a good enough running game that we saw last night to be able to put up some decent points. And we have a defense that could be the best defense in the NFL. So that's the one that I look at and I think makes the most sense. But the one that would be the best for them, in my opinion, is Stafford. I just don't really know how realistic that is.
Yeah, I feel like you're right. The most likely options are probably stuff like Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco might be the single most likely option. Carson Wentz, I think, is another obvious one that makes a lot of sense. The best option for them, it might be Jameis. You're going to be looking simply through availability. You're going to be looking at those top backups in the NFL type tier, and you listed off a couple of them there. Teddy Bridgewater is another name that always sort of circulates in that kind of category.
And so for those guys, I don't mean to cut you off, but like Bridgewater, Brissett, Gardner Minshew, like guys like that, Nick Foles, you might be raising the floor from what Zach Wilson gives you, but how much are you actually raising the ceiling? Because at that point, how much is the draft pick worth? I don't know exactly where those conversations are going to start with compensation. Maybe they don't really care. Maybe they think that raising the floor is the most important part. But to me, for a team that had Super Bowl aspirations, you got to give it a shot.
Right.
I think you got to take a bigger swing at the bat than that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is those guys they're top backups for a reason. And in the AFC, in particular in the AFC East, getting even just viable quarterback play is no good to you. Like, they need better than that. They need something that's capable of going toe-to-toe with the special type quarterbacks that they're going to be running into. As for the funniest options, the two funniest options to me are trades within the division. Number one, trading to get Mike White back from the Dolphins would be hilarious.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
And number two, because Mike White is the perennial Jet savior, right? Everything unravels.
Hall of Famer. He's got gear in the Hall of Fame.
It all unravels. Mike White steps in and for 2.5 games looks like an all-pro and then gets injured and we never get to see it again. So that would be pretty funny. And then the Jets flipping like an absurd draft pick to the Patriots for Mac Jones would just be hysterical. And the Patriots just throwing Mac Jones out the door to get a draft pick from the Jets. You can't tell me that isn't the funniest thing that could happen.
I think Tom Brady is the more likely potential Patriots quarterback that would play for the Jets, actually. But I don't know how likely that one is either. Brady is. It seems like he's always picking up the phone and calling about opportunities. Yeah. So I wonder if that one actually happens.
Here's one that Brady putting his ownership thing on hold to play for the Jets in an emergency role would be insane.
I see a couple people in the chat. Like, some people are talking about Dorian Thompson-Robinson from the Browns. Some people are talking about Aiden O'Connell from the Raiders. I don't really think the Jets would make either of those moves, because as good as those guys looked in the preseason, it's preseason and they're rookies.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they would even find those moves viable or upgrades over Wilson, I think, from where they're currently at. This is an option that I thought about that would be crazy, that would take a lot of moving parts that I haven't seen. Kirk Cousins. Because the Vikings, I think it's pretty clear they're going to move on from Kirk Cousins at the end of the season.
Yeah.
He's got 1 year left on his deal. I think there's some money that you could probably move around a little bit, especially if Galaxy branding here. The Jets are going to keep their first-round pick because they don't have to give it to the Packers, because Rodgers, we assume, is not going to play 65% of the snaps because we assume he's going to be out for the season. That means that they are sending their second-round pick, I think, to the Green Bay Packers, right?
Yeah.
if they were already operating thinking that they were not going to have their first round pick, if you go to Minnesota and you basically say, we'll give you a first round pick for Kirk, but you have to, like, most of the money, if not all of the money, basically just has to stay on your books. You're basically giving to us for free. And they're operating as if they did not have the first round pick anyways, and they're going to get Kirk Cousins, and then Kirk Cousins is their quarterback.